This is a demo for Illustrator Assignment 1, where I've asked you to create an animal out of some basic shapes. So I'm going to create this ram here, and I'm going to start by setting up my workspace. I've got my reference image up there, just like you can have, and I'm just going to create some color swatches over here that I'm going to use my eyedropper tool to select a handful of colors from my image that I think I'm going to want to use. So I'm going to just use the eyedropper. And you can just press I to turn your eyedropper on there. I'm just going to select a couple of light colors and a few darker shades. I can always add more colors later. I'm going to start by just adding some basic shapes that I think will work for the muzzle of my goat. I'm going to start with some rectangles with some rounded edges. And you don't have to worry about the color just yet. I'm also going to lock the bottom layer where my photo is and my color swatches are, so I need to add a new layer there before I can start drawing. So I'm just going to draw a few rectangles here, and I'm going to grab those inside corners to round them out. And then I'll change the color by pressing I with eyedropper and selecting a color from my palette over there. Then I can make a few adjustments to it if I need to. And I'll continue by adding a few more shapes. Copy that one, and then I'll adjust the scale a little bit and add some more shapes until I'm happy with how that muzzle looks. I also need to add a general shape just for the goat's head behind that muzzle. I'm going to create a new layer for that and make sure that I drag it below the muzzle layer so that when I draw the shape for the remainder of the head, it sits behind it. Always check the order of your layers if things don't look exactly the way you wanted them to, because chances are you've got something stacked behind the shapes that you wanted. Now I'm going to alter this oval just a little bit using the direct selection tool. That lets me grab anchor points along the path of that oval and move them out a little bit to create a better shape for my goat's head. It's not a goat, it's a sheep. And I'm going to create my sheep's nose out of a couple of triangles with rounded corners, inverted. I just created one that was kind of that taupe color, and then I copied it and chose my darker color, stacked them one on top of each other just so I could get a little bit of a kind of a shadow effect under the nose. Change the size a little bit, make sure that it's centered on my little sheep's face. Happy with that. And I've noticed the top of the sheep's head is a bit broader than its muzzle. So I'm going to add an oval here behind the top of the head and sort of widen it out a little bit, add that sort of hump to the top of the head so the horns have a place to attach. I'm going to just fiddle with this a little bit with the size and the color and put it behind the rest of the head so that it doesn't sit on top connected to the muzzle. And I need to make some adjustments to that shape just a little bit to make it look the way that I need it to. And again, I'm going to use my direct selection tool after I've used my pen curvature tool to just add a couple more anchors here so I can grab them and adjust this shape a little bit. Just it needs to be a little bit pointier on top and a little broader on top. So again, that's just the direct selection tool to grab the path anchors that are already there in my oval and make some adjustments. Now I've added a couple of ovals to the side of my sheep's head so that there's a place for his eyes to go. The skull seems to kind of flare out just a little bit for the eye sockets, so I've added those in. Now I'm going to create the ears. You can't really see the ears in my reference photo. They're sort of behind the horns, but I looked at a couple of other reference photos to get a sense of what those ears might look like. So I'm just going to use an oval shape here, and I'm going to copy it and change the color of the copy after I've added a few anchor points to this using my pen curvature tool, just so I can make some changes to this shape to make it look a little bit more ear-like. That's not bad. I'm going to make a copy of it and change the color so I can make it look a little bit like the inside of the ear. I'm just going to move the copy up to overlap the original and then adjust that new shape a little bit so that it sort of fits inside that ear a little bit better. And now that I have the ear the way I like it, I'm going to select both parts and then transform them with my reflection tool. And I'm going to click copy. So now I have a duplicate of my ear here. And I'm going to put it on the other side of my sheep's head. Now I'm going to make my sheep's eyes, and I'm going to do that over to the side just because I don't want to accidentally select other parts of the sheep's head while I'm doing it. And sometimes I like to create, if it's an element that's kind of small, I like to create it slightly larger than I'm going to need so I can see it better. And then later on, I will group those elements together and then reduce the size, shrink it down before I place it. So I'm creating a few circles here, one for kind of the color of the eye and one for the pupil. I'm going to resize that pupil and then move it up onto the rest of the eye. And I'm not quite sure about that pupil placement. I need to sort of zoom in a little bit so I can see it a little bit better. I might end up making sort of a cross-eyed sheep if I'm not careful. So there's some experimentation involved there. To make an outline for the eye, I'm going to use my brush tool to just draw a little curve over the top of this pupil and eyeball here. And Illustrator does a great job of kind of smoothing out your line by default. I changed the color of that outline a little bit to make it match. And now I'm going to flip it using the reflection tool so I can use that same curve for the underside of the eye. So I'm going to copy it horizontally this time and then rotate it a little bit to make that inner point meet. And I need to make a few more adjustments. I'm also going to use my brush tool to paint in that gap between the outline of my eye and the eyeball itself. And I need to make a few little adjustments to those inner and outer points. Now I think I need sort of eyelashes. I'm going to try kind of a rectangle and skew it a little bit to see if I can create something that looks sort of like some, just like the outline of an eyelash. Scale is not going to get me what I want. I'm just going to use the direct selection tool here and just adjust these corners to make this a little bit wider and kind of at an angle. And I think it works okay when I'm done with it. So that's what my eyelash looks like. It's just like a little, I don't know, a rectangle there that's kind of skewed. And now I need to fill in this little gap here. Just going to use my paintbrush to do it. I initially used the wrong color here, so I need to change that color to match the rest of the outline of the eye. And then I'm going to put that layer behind the outline layers so that it just kind of blends in. I'm going to select all the parts on my eye here and group them together so I can move it up all at once and position it on my sheep's head. And then I'm just going to select it and use reflect if I don't accidentally select something I don't want to. I may end up actually just having to go over and select the layers. There we go. Now I can right click on it and use the reflection tool to flip it over after I've rotated it to the position that I like. So transform, reflect, vertical, copy. Now I can move that eye over to the other side. And I think that looks pretty good so far. I'm going to give my sheep a little bit of a body, just some kind of shoulders, so that the head doesn't seem to be just kind of floating in space. Just going to use a shape here, make it a slightly darker color, kind of a gray color, and move it to the back. These horns are going to be tricky. Now, if this wasn't a demo for just building shapes, I would just use my pen tool and draw those horns. But this is a shape tutorial, so I'm going to use a shape. So initially, I'm just going to use a rectangle here, and then I'm going to use my direct selection tool to start grabbing those corners and sort of making this rectangle a bit more pointed. And I also want to put the base of the horn against the sheep's head, because that's where it should be coming from. So I'm just going to make a few little tweaks. And this creates a shape that isn't too bad for a horn. I'm going to use my pen tool to add one more anchor point down here, and then use my direct selection tool to kind of pull that side up just a little bit. And then I'm going to convert that top corner to a curve. So I just clicked on the anchor and then selected curve over there in my menu. So now it's not pointy, it's curved, and I can move it down. And this is not a bad horn just as it is, but it's not the effect that I'm trying to get. So that's one way I could have done it. But I really want to try to get that kind of ram horn look. I'm going to adjust the color of the inside of the ears because I realized I'm going to use this tan color for the horns, and they would have overlapped and it would have been visually confusing. So I'm going to try to make this curved horn here, and I'm going to use an ellipsis to do that. And then I'm going to start making some adjustments to that ellipses. So I've added a second ellipses inside of that one, and I'm going to use that with the Pathfinder tool to sort of punch a hole into that background shape that I think sort of resembles the inside shape of this sheep's horn. So now I've got this shape, and now we're getting closer to that curved spiral horn. I'm going to use my pen and curvature tool to add a few more anchors to this because I need to pull that inside corner in to make the interior point of this horn. And this just takes some kind of experimentation and making some slight adjustments and pulling in one side pretty extremely to get it to look sort of like that spiral. But I'm going to need to break that circle. So I'm going to use my line tool to draw a line across it. And then I'm going to select both that and the ellipses and use one of my Pathfinder tools to cut that line. So now instead of having a continuous loop, I have a loop that has a break in it. And the Pathfinder tool is going to let me do that. With the shape the way I like it, I'll make a copy of this. So I have two of these horns. I'll lighten the color just a little bit. I'm going to pair these together. So one is the shadow of the horn and the other one is kind of the foreground of the horn. I need to reorder my layers so that the horn is behind the sheep's head. And then, of course, make a copy of it with the reflection tool so I can put the identical horn to the other side. And then finally, I decided that it would look good if the sheep had kind of a big fluffy body. So I'm just going to make some circles here. I'm going to make a whole bunch of circles, and then I'm going to join them together using the shape builder tool to create a big fluffy woolly body for my sheep. And then finally, I created a background to go behind the sheep's body to set it off and contrast it a little bit. And now I'm going to save it. And we have two choices when we want to save. The first one is to go to File and Export, Save for Web. And then you can choose either a PNG or a GIF. If I choose GIF 128, no dithered, make sure that it's clicked to be art optimized. And then I can preview it. Looks good. And I could save it that way. If you find that your image looks fuzzy or blurry when you try to do this, you can also export it as a PDF. So we can go to File, Save As, and choose PDF and save that. And that will give you a nice crisp version of your artwork. And either format is fine for submitting this assignment.